afternoon and welcome to this post-lunch session on heritage conservation and democracy. We have with us four veteran and eminent architects who are also well marinated in the area of heritage conservation. So let me, without further ado, introduce all of them in the alphabetical order. I begin with architect Komalika Bose. Komalika Bose is an urban conservationist and founder of Heritage Synergies India, a Mumbai-based consultancy. Her work lies at the intersection of built and cultural heritage, curation, research, and education. Komalika has worked on community-oriented urban conservation initiatives in Indian cities, namely Kolkata's Chitpur Road and Chinatown, Mumbai Worli's Koliwada, Pune's cantonment area, and Azimgarh in Murshidabad. She is also a curatorial and research consultant for museum and cultural heritage projects. I'm sorry, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Namely Kolkata's Chitpur Road and Chinatown, Mumbai's Worli Koliwada, Pune's cantonment area, and Azimgarh in Murshidabad. She is also a curatorial and research consultant for museum and cultural heritage projects, working on upcoming new museums in India. She co-curated the exhibition Bengal's Durga at London's Totally Thames Festival 2018 and has authored 5 books, including People Called Kolkata, Delhi Penguin Random House 2019, and The Hoysala Legacy, Mumbai, JCO, Winter 2019. Komalika completed her master in historic preservation planning from Cornell University as a Fulbright scholar and was assistant professor at CEPT University, Ahmedabad from 2008 to 2015. She is a recipient of the SAH Jetty International Fellowship 2016, the European Union's Global Cultural Leadership Program 2018, and the French Ministry of Culture's International Training Program Séjour Culture 2018. She has gained international work experience in New York through positions at Historic Districts Council and Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Komalika is an expert member of the ICOMOS, International Scientific Committee on Shared Built Heritage, and the coordinator of National Scientific Committee on Shared Built Heritage, ICOMOS India. Living in Mumbai for the last 5 years, she has worked with the UDRI and G5A Foundation for Contemporary Culture and also taught at Kamala Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture and Gyan Pravah. Our next panelist, Kirtida Unwala, is trained in architectural conservation at Center for Conservation Studies, De Montfort University, Leicester, 1996, Charles Wallace India Trust, and British Council Scholarship. Kirtida has an independent architectural conservation practice for more than 2 decades. The focus of her projects has remained multi-directional and ranges from restoration projects of individual assets and sites to conservation planning at larger levels of wider environments. She has worked on numerous conservation documentation and heritage listing projects independently and with INTAC. She has remained a member of the Heritage Committee at Mathiran Hill Station, Maharashtra, as well as the monitoring committee of the Mathiran Eco-Sensitive Zone. Having carried out a heritage listing proposal for Satara town, she has remained a member of the Satara Regional Planning Board for advice in planning and management of heritage assets. She has also contributed as a member of the Heritage Review Committee, which was set up by the Mumbai Municipal Commissioner in the audit of the Heritage List of 2012. Currently, she is member of the Mumbai Heritage Conservation Committee under the aegis of the Mumbai Municipal Corporation. An ardent educationist, Kirtida has remained a teaching faculty at the J.J. College of Architecture, 1985 to 1992 and 2006 to 2010, Rizvi College of Architecture, 1993 to 2000, and since last decade, she is a visiting faculty at the Master's course in Architectural Conservation at Kamala Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute. At the IES College of Architecture, Bandra, Mumbai, she has undertaken special sessions on urban conservation for postgraduate courses in urban and regional planning, respectively, and is also a thesis guide for final year studies towards architectural research and design dissertation. Our third panelist, who will also be moderating the session, architect Mustansir Dalvi, is Professor of Architecture at Sir J.J. College of Architecture, Mumbai. He holds a PhD from the Indian Institute of Architects, Bombay. His doctoral thesis is Buildings as Text, Developing a Semiotic of Bombay's Art Deco Architecture, 1930 to 1949. A former member of the Academic Council and chair of the Board of Studies in Architectural Education of the University of Mumbai, he is presently on the Board of Governors of the MMRDA Heritage Conservation Society and a trustee of Art Deco Mumbai. Dalvi has lectured and read several papers on architectural education, architectural history and heritage, urban transformation, and architectural semiotics. He is published in New Architecture and Urbanism, Development of Indian Traditions, Buildings That Shaped Bombay, The Architecture of G.B. Mhatre, UDRI, Quiet Conversations, The Architecture of Kamu Iyer, MPC, NCPA, Mulk Raj Anand, Shaping the Indian Modern, MAG, and is the author of The Romance of Red Stone, An Appreciation of Ornament on Islamic Architecture in India. In 2016, he edited 20th Century Compulsions, Modern Indian Architecture from the Marg Archives, Marg 2016. Writings about Indian modernist architecture from some of the important practitioners of the time. His latest book is The Past is Present, Pedagogical Practices in Architecture at the Bombay School of Art, Sir J.J. UDRI 2016. His columns for Time Out Mumbai, Firstpost.com, The Hindu, Scroll.in, and TheWire.in are critical observations on Mumbai's urbanity and its contradictions. Our last and senior-most panelist, architect Vikas Dilavari, is a practicing conservation architect with 3 decades of experience exclusively in the conservation field, ranging from urban to architecture. He has done his double masters in conservation from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and from the University of York. He was the head Department of Conservation at Kamala Raheja Vidyanidhi Institute of Architecture, Mumbai, from its inception in 2007 to 2014. His practice has successfully executed several conservation projects, ranging from prime landmarks to unloved buildings of Mumbai. He was instrumental with INTAC, Mumbai chapter, to list the CST station as World Heritage Site in 2004. Several of his projects have received national and international recognition. A total of 17 of his projects have won UNESCO Asia Pacific Awards for Cultural Preservation in Southeast Asia. He has worked on many significant heritage public buildings in Mumbai and in other parts of the country, like the Aga Khan Palace, Pune, Dr. Bhaudaji Lad Museum and Christ Church in Bhaikala, Mumbai, the adaptive reuse of Patiala House in Dehradun as an oil museum, 2007, the restoration of Archiepiscopal Palace in Old Goa, 2002-2004. His recent project includes restoration of Flora Fountain in Mumbai. Apart from this, Mr. Dilavari is also busy restoring the unloved normal fabric of the city, that is century-old tenanted trust properties belonging to GZRF, a Parsi charitable trust. Mr. Dilavari has lectured and written extensively on the subject of conservation, nationally and internationally. And with this brief introduction, I request the panelists to start the session.
Thank you so much for the introductions, and welcome to the audience for this special session on heritage, conservation and democracy. On my behalf, I would like to welcome also our friends Kamalika, Kirtida and Vikas, very eminent architects and conservationists who have been in this field for a very long time. And this is a great opportunity for us to discuss the state of affairs of heritage conservation, especially in Bombay, as things stand today, and look back a little bit perhaps at the highlights over the last 30 years. I think that the current conservation movement has had its kind of peaks and troughs. I think right from the beginning of the 1990s, this started, and I think there were a few very interesting and very good initial achievements, and we have been able to, in the city of Bombay, conserve several of the buildings that were very, very significant historically as well as architecturally, uh, and were languishing for a very, very long period of time. There were some notable names in the conservation movement right there at the beginning, and both Vikas and Kirtida, definitely two of them. Uh, what have the achievements been over the last 30 years? I think the one is that the initial projects that were conserved became very interesting role models. Uh, the activism of the common citizen of the city of Bombay became a role model as well for other cities to emulate. In the process, at least many of the colonial era or the imperially kind of patronized buildings were conserved and today are important places for visitors from all over the world to come and visit. What perhaps did not happen to the extent that we would be happy about is that while buildings as individual edifices got conserved, surroundings, precincts, and environments, which also are very important historical, cultural, or even environmental artifacts, have really not been able to be preserved in a very satisfactory manner. We will be talking about some of these things over the course of this hour and a half. At the same time, I think we should also be raising the issue of democracy, which I think in our case will mean the role of the citizen, both as an active participant in the life of the city, but also as a responsible participant in taking forward the notion of heritage, of preservation, of the conservation both of memory and the creation of an identity. I'm sure these are points that will be brought out by our panelists. So this is how we are going to go about doing this, this session. I will invite all the three panelists to come and make a statement, a brief kind of talk for about 10 minutes each. And then I will put a few questions to them and we can see how the conversation develops. So without taking too much time, what I would do is invite Kamalika to make her brief presentation for about 10 minutes or so. Kamalika, please.
Thank you, Mustansir, and thank you so much for inviting me to this panel today. It's indeed a pleasure and an honor to share the platform with people like Kirtida, Mustansir, and Vikas, who have been pretty much involved with the conservation movement in Mumbai right from the beginning. And also many thanks to Ms. Nalwala, Ms. Kelkar, Venkatesh, and Ramesh for facilitating this and inviting me. I would like to first share my screen so that I can also show some images while I make my introductory remarks. So please let me know if this is visible.
Yes, it is.
Okay, I've now changed it to full screen mode.
Yes, go ahead.
So I would like to open my remarks with a quote by M.K. Gandhi, followed by a provocation. Gandhi ji famously said, The world has enough for everyone's need, but not for everyone's greed. And hence the provocation: is unchecked greed killing Mumbai's rich urban heritage and its pioneering conservation movement? It is widely established world over that heritage conservation and urban development goals can be allies in creating healthy, livable cities and that retain a strong sense of place, a sense of identity, and are yet future aligned and not frozen in time. Mumbai's historic urban fabric is a synthesis of the richly embodies histories of diverse communities, narratives of struggle and enterprise, places of collective memory, and structures of aesthetic and cultural expression. But when unrestrained development becomes the singular mantra, we rapidly move towards a flattening of these same identities, a sense of placelessness, and a visual homogeneity that is today its burgeoning skyline. Mumbai is more than a collection of its important buildings. To seek to preserve a limited number of outstanding buildings while failing to retain and enhance the more modest streets and their setting has been likened to keeping the cherries out of the cake and throwing the cake away, quite literally. The quality and character of Mumbai resides in the sum of its parts and their interrelationships, in its uses of land and the juxtaposition of functions, the social mix of its communities and cultural practices. In seeking a new urban reality, Mumbai's historic cores register attrition and eventual collapse in neglect, misplaced priorities, and fragmented vision. These quarters are forced to become poor cousins of the evolving city, a city once defined by its traditional urban neighborhoods, but now considered unfashionable burdens on future growth and resources. This underplaying of significance and value has relegated to the background wholesome acknowledgement or action towards conserving or protecting traditional inner city neighborhoods and its built artifacts. Fast-paced urban change in Mumbai began in the 90s, triggered by forces of globalization, where the vanishing value for social and cultural milieu of existing built fabric has created a complex set of developmental issues. Historic areas generally continue to decline and transform, with their physical, social, and economic functions stagnating and their present potential for any contribution to the city's imageability and economy slowly eroded. But development is not the only villain. It's quite easy to every time pass the buck on development. We must look inwards and introspect too. Suketu Mehta has called Mumbai a Sone ki Chidiya, and it remains so. Waves of migration and enterprise have shaped the history of the city.
Kamalika, there is some static disturbance, I think.
I can't really hear it at my end.
Yes, yes. I think you need to rectify that.
Oh, because I can't hear any disturbance at my end, so.
No, there is.
Even I can hear that.
Yeah.
Just speak, Kamalika.
Many of the city's landmarks and designated
It's
precincts.
just a little there, it's improved. So I think you can go ahead.
Okay. Many of the city's heritage landmarks and designated precincts are results of these early phases. However, over the last 40 years, gradual deindustrialization has led to a shift in migration patterns. As per the 2011 census, 43% of Mumbai and MMR's population are recent migrants from within and outside the state. Can heritage conservation also serve the needs of these new communities, including the poor and the marginalized, the newcomers whose voices and narratives often remain unheard, who perhaps don't know the city well, whose struggles and aspirations are different? How do we make them value Mumbai, her history and heritage? Is it asking for too much? A famous Shakespearean tragedy emphatically states, "What is the city but the people? What is the city if not the people?" So what can we do as historians, conservationists, civil society to make every dweller of Mumbai feel included, feel strongly for the city, love the city, and foster a deep understanding of her legacy? Built heritage conservation cannot only be reserved for a small group as a fringe activity enabled by sympathetic authorities, visionary patrons, endowed clients, enlightened citizens, and the small community of conservation professionals. It is our duty to conserve the significance of the multicultural and multidimensional heritage assets that we have inherited and hand them down to future generations to sustain plural legacies of the past. And yet, despite the challenges, Mumbai has played a pioneering role in the heritage conservation movement in India. The 1995 regulations and resultant policies paved the way for safeguarding much of the fort area, as well as buildings and precincts across the island city. A citizens' movement led by an active civil society and able assistance from local bodies and governmental structures, a systematic approach to documentation and decision-making proved to be a watershed moment. To quote Rahul Mehrotra, besides achieving improvements in the physical environment, these initiatives shifted the debate from architectural conservation to urban conservation, drawing the movement closer to the planning process. And yet, in these 25 years, the clock seems to be slowly turning back again. Provisions in the Development Plan 2034 delists or attempts to delist grade 3 structures, thereby endangering heritage precincts. Cluster developments of the Bhindi Bazaar kind might slowly become the norm. Over 14,000 cessed buildings across the city have found no feasible solutions. Each year, building collapses, fires, and monsoon damages leads to a colossal and unfortunate loss of life and property out of sheer neglect. The inability to create financial incentives and repair funds for private homeowners has paralyzed long-term maintenance of heritage properties. The ICOMOS General Assembly 27 led to the Delhi Declaration on Heritage and Democracy that recognizes heritage as a fundamental human right. It states that heritage belongs to all people, men, women, and children, indigenous people, ethnic groups, people of different belief systems, and minority groups. There are associations and meanings, records related places and objects. This advocates for conservation to really become a people-centered approach. In conclusion, cultural identities should not be compromised by uniform and insensitive planning. The protection and sustenance of heritage resources should be the basis of developmental policies and planning programs that also ensures the harmonious insertion of contemporary interventions into heritage settings. The beauty and speciality of Mumbai's built heritage rests in its civic architecture, lived neighborhoods, and native communities. Its variety of architectural styles and regional flavors brought in by the early settlers lends an architectural flair that is playful and rich. From the sprawling CST station to smaller urban structures like fountains and piaus, to ethnic enclaves, urban villages, and Art Deco high-rises, these are only some, but the city has a lot to boast of, including 3 World Heritage areas, but also much that is threatened today that we need to collectively be sensitive to and work to safeguard. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamalika. Thank you especially for foregrounding the citizen, the common person, even the underprivileged like migrants, as you mentioned, who become very important stakeholders in any notion of a city that we may have for the future. I've always said that the one thing that a city is most important for is that you can always take it for granted. And I think that heritage conservation allows us to do that. And the exact opposite can be a very disturbing phenomenon in the destruction of memories and as well as our own identity within the city. So thank you for a very broad-based introduction, and you have raised several very important points that I think we can take up again. May I now ask Kirtida to make her presentation?
Yes, Mustanza?
Kirtida, could you make your presentation now, please?
Yes, please. Am I visible on the screen?
Yes, you are, and you are audible as well.
All right, okay. So I have purposely not structured my session for a simple reason that so much has been experienced through working in the city, not only as an architect, but going a little beyond and looking at conservation in the sense that to understand what is the significant component of the city, which we call as heritage, and how can that be protected, if not conserved, at least. And so this experience has been vast, but not the least, in the sense there are many, many people like myself, including the 3 speakers here with me. And we should not forget the contributions of each one of them. The first person that I would like to remember is Mr. Shyam Chainani. And for all of you, and that was something that I wanted to share with the Asiatic Society through the ages of BEAG. And I think Hema is here. She's listening to this. The diary, which was written by Shyam Chainani. It is this diary, which is called an Indian diary by Shyam Chainani, Heritage and Environment. The focus here in this cataloging of his experiences goes far and wide. He was like this single-man army who took the country at large, brought it to its knees in the point of considering heritage conservation, not only of the built form, but also the environmental forms. And so he considered that it is not just the built form as one plot of land. He considered that the whole country holistically needs to be understood as an environmental asset overall. And he came from a background to say that planning principles for the whole country needs to be really looked at and really re-looked at. And he took the Supreme Court, charged it with so many aspects of such considerations, and brought in the very important environmental law into the country. So it's a very high indulgence by a stakeholder. He was not the government at any point of time. But along with his friends who were like-minded, all this was brought about. And so if you look at the title that we are dealing with today of Heritage, Conservation, and Democracy. So in the morning today, I just bumped into an article which was very interesting by Peter Bill Larson, and it comes from a webpage of indiaseminar.com. And it very interestingly talks just about democratic heritage and heritage-based democracies. So the article inspects this idea of how democratic heritage and heritage-based democracies can be joined together, and it can be dealt with in a kind of a consonance manner with overlaps. And I would just like to read a little bit from there. It says this article is about thinking heritage and democracy together in general and making a case for human rights and heritage in particular. It calls for a renewed cultural politics, seeking to both democratize heritage and render democracies more heritage sensitive. I think it's a beautiful thing to conjoin and to think of in the first place. And then it goes on to say quite a few things. One of the most important thing it says is, and I read again, it says, the spectacle of heritage shows catering to the ever-growing domestic and international tourism consumption as another case in point. While often framed as a win-win in terms of coupling heritage conservation with carefully messaged heritage products, it raises fundamental questions about the nature of contemporary heritage values and their more or less subtle transformation. It also raises core questions about how such additional value production and transformation is potentially captured or controlled by a minority, or conversely, mobilized to be shared more equitably. And the author says, I say this not to challenge the idea of tourism as such, but rather that we need to recognize head-on that heritage has shifted from being a marginal concern for a few towards more employed in central political narratives of identity, economic activity, and other forms of value. Still, it is striking how heritage policy repeatedly remains silent about this, constantly growing an elephant in the room. So it brings us to not just the aspects of how much to conserve, who should conserve it, who should govern the conservation, and who should protect it, and who should carry out the actual conservation actions. It goes much beyond and points a finger at the very regime of democracy. Democracy, Indian democracy, it is one of the best democracies in the world. It is we who appoint the government. It is the people who appoint the government. And by that virtue, the government has also played its role, especially in the case of Mumbai. So in the case of Mumbai, we had the first ever heritage list, which was confirmed in 1991, and the story continues. And Kamalika has covered a huge ground about its background. But the core question is, when you think about planning policies for the cause of conservation, I think it is very laxed. It is the same government who has identified the listing. It is the same government who has identified and played a very vital role in conforming of the 3 World Heritage Sites. But sadly, there is some languishing happening. And every time it is left to people who are the forebearers or maybe at the receiving end of the whole spectrum, to take it ahead and go to court each time. We have so many cases in Mumbai itself, raised from so many dimensions that is affecting heritage in different aspects. And if each time it is the people who have to take it to the court, why can't we talk to the government that we have elected? And why can't they be a little more responsible and consider significant heritage values as a center, or rather at the core of all understanding of heritage conservation? I think this is where the lacuna lies. Early on, in my early days of understanding architecture, and also to understand in those days as a student, there was a great enthusiasm in understanding how urban design plays a role in the setting of a particular building that the architect is looking at. And that took me to one of the most favorite articles that I had read. And it said, and I'll just say the title, it says, whose land is it anyway? Where did the commodity of land come up? Because it is this land as a commodity which has brought up speculation processes. And if it is speculation processes which is taking a kind of a back step in affecting heritage conservation, then I think it is high time that the government and the Urban Development Department takes cognizance and becomes a little more responsible to the same assets that they have identified and declared as heritage. And So the policies that are languishing in the background needs to really come up and not just consider them as price, as cost, but also consider them, or rather only consider them as significant values, and significant values which are cultural values, which belong to people. And people at the helm in the government are also people. So this becomes a very major concern for people like me, and I'm sure for all the people who are in the process of carrying out conservation actions and trying to promote these actions, that this is at the core of everything that is going wrong in the aspects of management of heritage assets. So I will leave it there and be glad to answer questions that arise out of this context. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirti. I think one of the important points which you have raised here is that whenever there is a decoupling between the notion of the built edifice and the fact that it is part of the city and part of the user experience. There is a certain distancing, there is a certain abstraction by which becomes the gaze by which we look at heritage or buildings, and then it is very easy to kind of play around, manipulate. So I think at all times this decoupling needs to be prevented from happening, and that we always should be seeing both the city as well as the buildings worthy of heritage from the point of view of the users and its presence in the city. Perhaps when you raise the issue of why the government has also had been one of the problems over here, I think, is probably in a lot of the policies, this decoupling comes very easily. And I think maybe when one writes further policies, they should always kind of be linked to the fact that the city is a used city. The city is an aging city. It is part of, or it is co-owned, shall we say, by every person who resides in this city. Thank you once again for the presentation and the presentation of several of the issues. And I'm sure there will be questions on that. And now may I request Vikas Dilavari to make his presentation.
Thanks, Mustansir. It's a pleasure to be here and to share the views of conservation. Actually, my views of conservations have changed in the last, about 3 decades. Initially, as a young student, we saw history as an important component, and that was the agenda to keep the historicity of the city and to have the academic angle there. But slowly you realize that things are different and they work differently. Now, when I see conservation, I see it from a very different point of view, that what we see in a city is nothing but redevelopment. And according to me, it's like a car which doesn't have a brake. So conservation can be a kind of a good brake so that you don't meet with accidents. You need to have some kind of a check balance where development and conservation go hand in hand. So that's the first and the foremost thing which I think is important. The second thing is that we have a very fragile ecosystem, and the worst is that we do not have an infrastructure which is, this infrastructure which we've inherited is about a century old and is already fragile. Till we don't concentrate on improving that on a very large front, it's best to conserve and to use what you have as resources. The third important component which it comes is sustainability, because very often I find that things are just pulled down which were worthy of being used or could have been prolonged life. And it's very unfortunate that although we talk about climate change, we talk of so many things, but we never give a chance for this kind of conservation to be sustainable the other important component is that of late, my focus on ordinary unloved buildings, and what I've realized from there is that if an aspiration of the people, you instantly have an affordable housing, which is the need of the hour.
Vikas, your voice is breaking.
I'm seeing conservation or the push or experiment to see the glimpse of conservation. So, yeah.
Sorry, Vikas, your voice was breaking up.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So I'm saying that conservation, for, as a sustainable and instant affordable housing and other things, which is the need of the hour, we can get that immediately. The other important aspect of conservation is when you see what was happening a century ago, we had similar problems. Bombay has always been an island and pressures of development have always been there. But what we have not learned is how, with good planning and with good administration and the needs of the city were met with City Improvement Trust, trying to improve the, the health conditions and the quality of life and living. I think the City Improvement Trust gave some brilliant town planning schemes and things which have worked. And these are the clues which one should take because they had the planning component, they had the urban design component. So if we borrow all these things and if we could have integrated most of these things in our master plan or our development plan 2034, it would have been ideal. But we missed the boat, and still. Yes, there are efforts, there are public buildings which are being conserved, so which is a good thing. Sometimes the government is also keen, which is another positive thing. Tourism angle has been given, which is also a positive thing. But if you see it comprehensively and if you see it holistically, I think that is what is the need of the hour, and that's what would be good to have that. So these are some of my viewpoints, which I am happy to discuss based on my experience, to talk about it and to share where we've gone wrong, where we've achieved what we've achieved.
Okay, thank you, Vikas. I think taking all these important issues forward, perhaps what I can do is begin by asking a question which then can be taken up by all the speakers. I think let's begin with this. There seems to be a conflict between changing needs of the users of the spaces in contemporary times, vis-a-vis the need to preserve the identity of the city. How do you look at this conflict, and how do you think this conflict can be managed? If I may ask you, Vikas, since you have been the last speaker, you can directly perhaps respond to that, and then I can extend the question to the other two panelists.
It all depends. If you treat it as a conflict, then there is a problem. But if you treat it as an opportunity, and if you have the flexibility which you require to do it, like I was restoring some single room tenements. Fortunately, they had their toilets which were combined. They were not like chawls having separate toilets, but certainly we cannot be romanticizing chawls like that, where the quality of life plays an important role. But that doesn't mean we have to pull it down. There can be creative means of, sorting it out, adding things like a lift or adding things. Now it all boils down to sensitivity. And if you can do that, and it, this reflects right from how you place your air conditioners while you're doing your interior designing, and how you treat your building exterior, or for that matter, how you, manage to integrate it in a very sensitive manner. So I think these are opportunities, and I think, sometimes awards like, UNESCO award is there for now new designs and other things, which encourages these things. So these are some tiny steps forward. Everything need not be pulled down, and the conflict can be, if that is a conflict, it can be managed. And I've done so in a few of the buildings, where if you give them some better infrastructure in this thing, because what is important is the quality of life. And what people were enjoying, the open spaces, the common interaction at road level, at ground level where the doors are open. Now it's all getting converted to podiums. And and once your electricity goes away, these podiums are not the best of the best places to be. So when you can really, and these are the people who are born and brought up in these buildings because they are 70 to 80 years old. So that generation is fading off. The next generation has been raised here. They have a associational bonding with it. So if you improve and give them some better facilities, I think we can work there. It becomes a bridge.
Okay. Kamalika, would you like to?
Sure. So I think when we talk about identity, we also need to be cognizant of the fact that the city really does not have a singular identity. There are many layers to the city and the layers of the built fabric, which all kind of collectively create a composite heritage. And when we talk about democracy, normally we only assign it to people. And but I think we also need to assign the principles of democracy to these layers of the built environment. That today in Mumbai, it almost seems like certain kinds of heritage enjoy a higher kind of position, and those are the sites which become the loved heritage of Mumbai, and which is why I think Vikas has very aptly has this category of buildings which he calls the unloved heritage. So within heritage itself, there are so many hierarchies and layers, and it's almost like we are okay as a city sometimes to let go of or compromise and erase some of the lower unloved layers of heritage to preserve and celebrate certain kinds of heritage only. So I think if we combine the idea of quality of life, because I think that is fundamental, and how heritage spaces, heritage settings really allow us to improve on that quality of life. And combine that with also having a more democratic aspect towards how we identify and value the categories and the layers of heritage that the city has, and not just celebrate certain kinds or certain icons of certain eras. We will automatically maybe be able to arrive at a balance.
I think probably one of the most unloved part of the city is the public realm, because we seem to be much more cognizant about buildings and edifices and things like that. But really, just when you come on the streets outside them, there is absolutely nothing that can be really said when it comes to the presence of even say the streets and the alleyways of the city as being part of that heritage. Thank you for pointing out that there are several layers. Of course, there is the imperial city, which has always had the first priority for the patronage of conservation, and then Vikas provides in a sense the resistance by showing us how very ordinary simple housing can also be preserved and given a life for another generation or so. And I think Kirti also has done projects which come probably right there in the middle, which are both public but not imperial in that sense. A good example would be the Jama Masjid, which you have worked upon. And I'm just wondering, Kirti, if you can talk a little bit about this, that we can definitely, conserve buildings and things like that. But what are the spaces around them? Unmute, please.
Yeah. If I rather answer it in a different way, not answer, but discuss it in a different way.
Sure.
So the entire cycle of the layers that Kamalika very properly mentioned, the same layers are present in the heritage list. The heritage list is talking about layers. It talks about buildings, talks about precincts, it talks about precincts and sub-precincts, and it is all there. The issue is that they have not been managed wide in informed decision. And not that the informed decision is not there. So MMR HCS over this period of last almost 25 years, has done a wonderful job. And in the listing process itself, management plans have been prescribed. So people who are to administer them have to take cognizance of this. And when I say that, the management plans are looking not only at individual buildings, but they're also talking about how to manage its setting. And when I say the setting, it comes to the core question that you are raising about streets, streetscapes, the settings, etc. So there are categories which are listed. There are streetscapes also listed. What is missing out is the management. And not that we do not have the informed, educated privilege in the city. The city has a huge number of individuals who are educated enough to look at urban design patterns, urban design woven into planning, and so on. So there is no dearth of such
Kirti, there is
initiatives.
this great divide, you know, between the management plans for heritage conservation, as you very rightly say, are already there for the implementation, and the development plan of the city, you know, where suddenly all these things seem to be either forgotten or given much lower precedence. And it is within this gap which is being created that the whole city tends to fall through.
Yes, very true. So it is in the same continuity that when you look at even the Flora Fountain area, the sense the Fort Precinct, so to say, the Fort Precinct is the most privileged precinct, and it has received maximum attention for various reasons for conservation. One of the prime reasons, of course, is economics, and the other is showcasing, populist kind of. And people have now found out that by restoring buildings within a precinct like Fort Precinct, which is the economic core of Mumbai city, can showcase. And because of that showcase or the populist aspect that it has, it can also make money. And that is one of the major reasons why people have started to carry out conservation actions to the buildings in and around the fort area. But what Kamalika showed in her slides in her presentation was the lesser privileged precincts in the suburbs. And these have not received much attention. At the core lies definitely whose land is it anyway, whose right is it anyway, and where does it take them economically.
I think we can also at this point bring in this one aspect of tourism. There is this popular hypothesis, and I would just like all three of you to maybe just speak a little bit upon it. And the hypothesis is that we are now in almost a post-service age society, you know, after going through several waves of transformation. And what remains in this kind of space can only be picked up once again by the foregrounding of culture. And in many cities around the world, foregrounding culture has picked up otherwise dying cities and brought in once again a fresh kind of fresh blood, if you would like to use that phrase, you know, into the vitality and revitalizing the city by foregrounding culture. And obviously heritage and heritage conservation can become a very important tool and weapon in the foregrounding of culture. Bringing a lot of these areas together then can mean the redevelopment of precincts or the reimagination of precincts, such as what we have with the fort, now reimagined as a kind of art precinct. So I wonder whether you look at these as good strategic devices so that heritage can get conserved, because I do believe that we need any excuse that would be enough for you know, either the government or the patrons to come forward and allow the older buildings to get conserved. So I just wonder whether I may ask Kamalika first and maybe Vikas after that, and then Kirti, if you can just briefly tell us your views about this idea of reimagining cities as now cultural spaces in order to revitalize them.
Yes, and I think that's a very important point. And normally, tourism is something that, at least for conservationists, comes with a lot of baggage sometimes because it has the risks of mass tourism, the pitfalls that we see, say, in places like Venice, etc., which becomes a sensitive issue. But I think for Mumbai, we need to create these new narratives. The only kind of two primary narrative that is in everybody's imagination is that Mumbai is the financial capital of India. It needs to surge at a global pace and almost compete with the new skylines in the Middle East and in Southeast Asia, etc., which overpowers the other narratives that can develop. And therefore this narrative that falls out of it, that we are always pressured for land, and therefore development only needs to be in a certain kind. But enough research has shown that that's really not the case, and it's a lopsided view to some extent. So if we can use, and I think globally speaking, with the sort of sustainable development goals and things that even UNESCO is trying to talk about now through the frameworks of the historic urban landscapes, where tourism really has a potential, and new narratives of culture activating. And I think this is something which, say, spaces in the Mill are also doing successfully. They're really repurposing and recycling to bring in art, culture as sort of new narratives, inject things with new lifeblood. So, but at some level, I think there needs to be the vision. And I think what worked for Mumbai in the early 90s was that there were visionaries. And I think that vision still exists, but somewhere it's lost in the other overpowering debates. So if we can sort of rekindle that vision and that imagination, I think even the everyday citizen will begin to see it in a new light.
Because you think we have new narratives in conservation that we can now look at in order to continue the story of conservation in Bombay?
Yes. Before narratives, I just wanted to say, you use the word, the revitalization.
Yes.
It's sad that when an area needs to be revitalized, because Bombay is so vitalized always. Contrary, everyone keeps saying Fort area is getting the constant, the best attention and energy. But according to me, it's dying and decaying. All your corporates who were the patrons have shifted to Bandra Kurla complex, which should not have shifted there. They should have remained here. The sad part is why this has happened is no one is analyzing it, because the lease were expired. And the new leases have been worked out for 30 years, out of which 20 years have expired. So if you really want to think and tap conservation, and if you want to tap tourism, you have to have a holistic planning of everything. Now, I think just setting up few, when you have so many empty buildings on DN Road, just because many corporates have shifted, and what will happen is, yes, you will have some kind of tourism which will happen, but they'll get a lot of traffic and other things, which is not what, because most of these buildings were single owned and corporate identities. So I am too concerned about the Fort area also, dying a kind of a slow, gradual death, because you already have one building pulled down in DN Road, and there are many buildings waiting to have similar things happening. And this is despite having the first legislation and having Mumbai being the topmost. We are actually now going to set a new trend where redevelopment with conservation elements put into it, and a pastiche and a high-rise made, it will be justifying a new kind of conservation is being rewritten, which is disturbing to purists and to academicians. So that's a matter of concern. But to answer your other question of new narratives, yes, it can be worked out. Tourism is an important component, but it should not happen that it is tourism driven, because if you go to Istanbul, or if you go to places like Baku, a lot of tourism has been forced, whereas original inhabitants have been moved out. Now, that's not the real conservation, because when we talk of, communities and other things, you just erase them out and create a hype which is for tourism. That's not the kind of thing, because they have to use it together. Complex issue which needs to be seen, but the involvement of decision makers, the management. What I find our conservation is at a crossroads where you have pure conservation being discussed, whether what materials and which philosophy to use, and you're equally concerned is that something is being pulled down. So which is more important to save? Just retain the facade or do something more or add something. So, there are so many issues which are there.
Yeah. Kirti, do you have a view on this? Unmute.
Tourism is a double-edged sword. Tourism can make cities economically viable, maybe, but it also kills can tend to kill the original inhabitants and their aspirations and their way of life. And therefore, the quality of life is something that has become central to, globally, it has become central to institutions, education institutions who propagate the cause of conservation, that it should become people-centric. And people-centric cannot be outsiders only. It could not be just the tourists. And so it is very important that the well-being and the quality of life of the people who live there and people who have been the real inheritors of that heritage are catered to first and foremost. And therefore, this balance that both the speakers have mentioned, I would reiterate that balance is very vital when one talks about tourism. And several cities in the world has failed at achieving this kind of a balance. And people have been left bereft of their very sense of being, the sense of identity that we were talking about earlier is at a risk. So place of identity, belonging to a place, having grown up in a place, having memories. I think this memory as a value it should stand at the helm. And it is this value as a significant value that should come at the forefront of all planning considerations or design considerations for cities in their plans.
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, I think the one memory we have just lost in the past few weeks is Chor Bazaar.
absolutely.
I think that has significantly
Absolutely.
been wiped out from our memories, and now only we will look back at it. The older people will remember it in some form or the other, or whatever little meager documentation has been done. Now, this is a part of our intangible kind of heritage, but it's so deeply rooted with exactly what you were mentioning, is that the communities, who live in these places should be at the forefront of our thinking. So, Kirti, I'd just like you to continue talking about this by, I wonder if you can suggest what these communities can do, because in one sense, if we are talking about democracy, it is at the heart of this discussion. What does the citizen as a stakeholder do? Not say in the 90s when there was a role very clearly identified, but now after 2020, when the role has become a little blurred over a period of time, because, and I mean, if you go to anybody, they would say that heritage is happening. Okay, but we know the kind of problems that the city is facing, both at the level of legislation, infrastructure, redevelopment, real estate, and so on. And the person who lives in the city obviously is lower down in the order of priorities. So could you give a suggestion for what the stakeholder in the city, the person who lives in an area that is of heritage value, or a building that is of heritage value, what role can they play?
So the first thing I would say is we should have more of such sessions, because it is So thanks to Asiatic, but I see the number of participants, it is what, 66?
Yes.
And a representation of 66 people listening to a conversation and a discussion like this. It is such an important discussion where there is a partaking directly of the stakeholder and informed stakeholders.
That's right.
People who understand, maybe at that level at least. That is the first thing, I think. So the narratives of Kamalika mentioned, and there have been very good narratives which have happened in the city. They've been very chaotic, but so the Kala Ghoda festival, I would say. At Kala Ghoda festival, my office is right there. And I dare not step out for those 7 days because you are actually crushed. You cannot walk on the streets. The character of the area completely changes, gets transformed. Now, I wouldn't say that it qualifies to be called a good character or a bad character, but at least I would say positively that there is a showcasing happening. Who are the people who come there? People actually come from villages, rural areas, and from all over the metropolitan region, and they come to view their city, the city of Mumbai, which holds a prime significance in their minds even today. And they come in hordes, they come in busfuls, and I have observed it very closely. And so I've never entered into the Kala Ghoda festival since last 3 years. The first thing that comes to my mind is there could be a stampede, and the stampede can be so dangerous that it can kill. So I'm saying double-edged sword. And it goes for anything, any activity that one looks for, it has to be managed. If it is not managed, it can become dangerous. I am saying the word dangerous. That's what the other aspect that you talked about is what should a stakeholder do? If I look at the stakeholder from the administration point of view, they just have to open the Pandora's box. It's just there. It's all there. Why are they not adapting it? It took from 1995 to 2012 to revisit the list. After 2012, the Heritage Review Committee was set up only in 2017. And to my shock, when we started to visit the sites, almost 80% of the stock was not there. It wasn't there on ground. And then what is the advice that you give as a Heritage Review Committee? So, these are the kind of lacunas. So the time gap, the time frame, that would answer, and they should adapt it fast. The review committee has given its opinion to the Urban Development Department since last 3 years. Why is it not coming through? So it gives chance to stakeholder to understand the economics that overrides. And so I'm talking about overlapping of regulations. The heritage regulation, poor thing, is so small and minuscule that it is overburdened and it is overridden by so many overarching policies. 33.7 bolo, 33.9 bolo, many more. CRZ bolo, the relaxation of CRZ, and that is why we have the coastal highway coming up by such relaxation. Every time stakeholders have gone to court, even for the coastal highway, it is people who have gone to court. Vis-a-vis, if you look at, in my experience, look at the city of Singapore, look at UK. The whole of UK today is governed with a 50% stake in design decisions by stakeholders. It is compulsory, it is made law. So if they take a decision of putting a lamppost somewhere in both these areas, stakeholders, people from the neighborhood are called. They have their own subcommittees. Then they take a decision whether it is for their well-being or not. And then that is a decision which is passed on. So it's all management. There has to be a will. There has to be a value which is higher than a price and a cost. It is not always money.
Yeah. If I can ask Kamalika, whether you have examples from, say, places outside Bombay that you have worked on, where you can give us a positive role that a stakeholder can play in bringing in good transformation?
So, of the cities that I've worked in or even been to, I think, of course, there is still this belief that Mumbai really shows the way. And though we are talking about, the pitfalls of, everything that has kind of is going wrong since that high point was reached, I think many other cities have been even slower to respond urgently to these pressing transformations and needs. And if I just take the example maybe of Calcutta, where I work also quite significantly. I think there are some narratives and there are parallels between, say, Mumbai and Calcutta, primarily being of the sort of colonial antecedents. I think what works for Mumbai is that it's really broken out of that nostalgia burden that many other cities carry, and it is able to kind of pragmatically look, and citizens are able to engage, stakeholders are able to engage, looking at the present and the future rather than trying to recreate the past. But that having said, I think other cities are also which happens in Mumbai, it uses adaptive reuse very efficiently. And what I think works and has worked in Ahmedabad is really this fundamental thing of incentivizing conservation for stakeholders, which Mumbai has enshrined theoretically in its all its documents, but somehow it doesn't get translated. And conservation is one of those classic grounds where the sticks are always more than the carrots. In India, until we are able to give adequate number of carrots in the form of different benefits, maybe income tax rebates, property tax rebates, little incentives to, even conserve your facade, little incentives to conserve the space around you and enhance it, which cities like, I think, Ahmedabad the walled city of Ahmedabad has experimented with over the last 25 years. It's not just only now when it has got the UNESCO tag, but the heritage cell has been very proactive in creatively coming up with models that really allow to incentivize and make it attractive for a person living in a wooden haveli or a small pole house to even think twice before you want to demolish it or concretize and change your wooden facade, replace architectural elements, etc. And this constant dialogue and including them in the process of sharing their grievances as well as creatively working out alternative solutions. And I think that is, and Kirtida emphasized on this aspect of democracy. I mean, there can never be anything called too much democracy, right? So it is a slow process, therefore, and it takes 20-25 years, therefore, to come full circle on some of these goals.
I think we are kind of reaching the end of our time, and we would like to give a little time for questions and answers, but I cannot do that until I ask Vikas to have the last word. Vikas, can you tell me whether there is any possibility of a 4th UNESCO tag for Bombay?
If we can maintain the 3 which we have, I'll be happy for that. Rather than get a 4th one, because getting the tags are good, but it eventually boils down to maintain it.
Can it be taken away?
It can, but again, it's never taken away. They threaten it. It's like showing a yellow card, red card. But, by the time something or the other will happen politically or this and that, best example is VT station or CSMT, where they wanted to do a high-rise redevelopment in the open, which the buffer zone didn't allow.
Yes.
There was a big debate whether to lose the World Heritage Site tag to do this, but eventually the new proposal which has been submitted respects the buffer zone. So something good, but again, who implements? Because the buffer zone thing should have been in the master should have been in the development plan, because if the same government sent it, and that should have been in the development plan. So you don't have it in that.
Yeah.
I'm not to have this thing wishful for the fourth one, but if we can maintain the two which we have, well, I'll be happy with that.
True. And I think perhaps this is the right time to open up the panel for questions from the audience, and I can hand over back to the Madhu, is it, who is going to be conducting the questions and answers?
Yeah, Mustansir, I'm there.
Yes, please. So if you can pick up questions, and maybe if they are directed to any of the three panelists, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for this extremely thought-provoking session. And this is my personal take that democracy and conservation, I think they can't go hand in hand. Let's go to the questions. There are a few questions over here, and some of them are directed towards the panelists. Some of them are general questions. Okay. So the first question is a general question. How do you give timeline to heritage and democracy? Democracy will have different aspirations in varying timeline. How do you encompass all?
I wonder whether we can have a democracy if we do not have heritage as an inherent part of it, because that would mean that every democracy is kind of rootless democracy. Okay, and every subsequent generation will be equally rootless if we do not directly kind of associate the privileges that we have as citizens with the responsibilities that we have as citizens of preserving the city. I think that would be a simple enough answer for that.
So the second question is from Krishnaraj Iyer. Urban developments need to be sustainable, allow room for availability and scalability. However, it has been without understanding the livelihood and affordability of its people. This is a general observation.
Yeah, maybe I can ask our speakers if they can very, very quickly, just kind of show us the equivalence between the notion of heritage conservation and the notion of sustainability. I wonder if you can do that. I don't know, perhaps. Kirti, could you very quickly just tell us?
Can you just repeat that?
Urban development.
Can you just tell us what the equivalence is between heritage conservation and sustainability? Academic answer, but that would be nice.
Yeah, it is a direct link. So conservation is something which is imbibed in our minds as human beings. History has always been an important component of being a human being. And therefore, if it is about our memories of our places and our identity, and if it is a memory and if it is that valuable, it needs to be sustained. And it is in this manner that it is directly connected. Conservation, heritage conservation, is all about sustainability. It is an ingrained component of sustainability.
Yeah.
I would also, if I could add another maybe point to that, there is a saying, and we're kind of repeatedly taught that in conservation school, that the greenest building is the one which is already built, in terms of the materials that, there's embedded energy, and with environmentalism and sustainability, there is always now this question of recycling, reuse. So that, and we're all trying to recycle, reuse, but we only keep it in the domain of plastic or, other energy, etc. If everyone began to even look at buildings from the perspective of recycling, repurposing, saving energy, material, labor, construction costs, all of that, all of this, these notions and theories are extended into the built fabric, there is sustainability right there. And the second point, and I'll conclude there, is I was reading somewhere and it said that all the buildings that will exist, most of the buildings that will exist in 2050, already exist. So what is the sort of management of our built world? Our energy is supposed to get expended in thinking about new architecture, new urban form, new infrastructure. But cities like Mumbai are aging. There is already existing aging infrastructure, aging buildings, which are going to become a much bigger problem, and already are becoming problems, where we look at accidents, water shortage, etc., because a pipe has burst somewhere or a footbridge has fallen somewhere. So we need to kind of holistically look at this from the sustainability point of view.
Can we have the next question?
This is a question that I have posed, and it's since Vikas had talked about the Bombay Improvement Trust. So my question is, wasn't the planning of the BIT rather elitist in nature?
Sorry, was it?
Wasn't the planning of the BIT rather elitist in nature?
I don't think so. It was taking into account the quality of life, talking about connectivity, better ventilation, better facilities and things like that, and introducing a discipline of planning. According to me, you know, any good architecture, yesterday's good architecture is today's heritage. But can you design today's architecture which can be tomorrow's heritage? Now that's the fundamental question. If you can't, then there is no need to pull down these old buildings. Or for that matter, if you really take the, you know, what they had worked out in schemes, they served their purpose very successfully because it was for the need of the city.
The next question is to everyone. Do you think the reason why conservation and heritage is neglected topic in Mumbai and India at large, because it is neither seen as an economic driver, direct employment generator, nor an election issue? If you see that all those heritage sites that are directly seen as economic generators are well kept, like Taj Mahal, Mahabalipuram, etc.
Yeah, that's perhaps.
I think we've had smart cities, we've had so many other projects, but why don't we experiment with a conservation city? And we should seriously give it a chance to see whether conservation works for for very historic cities. We have so many historic cities. Give it a chance, give conservation as the focus of development and see how it benefits.
Next question is from Ritu Deshmukh. I would like to thank all the panelists by presenting very thought-provoking angles to this topic. My question is, where to stop in terms of developing and implementing sustainable tourism in the city?
We've taken this up, I think, a little bit, but perhaps if anybody has one more point to add.
Ritu, you're asking where does one stop, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where does one stop?
Yes.
I think it's again a part of the aspect of management. When all the characteristics and the factors or components have been weighed, they've been looked into. May it be economic drivers, may it be heritage conservation, may it be economic planning and well-being and value assessed development. Once all that has been composed, analyzed and evaluated, then that would derive the spot at which one stops. So it is again taking it back to management. I hope I've answered your question, Ritu.
Ritu is probably on mute, so she may not be able to answer.
Yeah, sure.
This is from Venkatesh. It's to all. My question to any of the esteemed panelists would like to take this question. Practically speaking, what is the future of cessed buildings in terms of probable efforts at conservation, considering the owners have no control or means now over many such properties?
Vikas has done many such buildings, so perhaps there could be a short answer.
Very difficult to, until unless you get, government support. You had the repair board, but if you introduce use of like-to-like materials, minimum intervention, and increase the per square feet costing, you can do it. But for that, people have to understand that, repair board of ordinary RCC building is separate and that of heritage building is separate. There's a classic example which is dying, for that matter, Watson Hotel also. So these are the two cess properties which are significant, but they require a different approach. And we talk about it, but we are doing nothing to increase, to modify the repair board policy. If you allow like-to-like material like wood to wood, then you have to increase the square feet costing. And it's simple to do it. And if you do it, you'll see the difference. Do the minimum intervention. Here, people tend to do maximum intervention. Our conservation is completely reverse because it's contractor driven and everyone wants to do maximum removal and reconstruction.
The next question is from Priyanka Panjwani, who thanks you for the great points that you have put forth in the discussion. What does the panel think about the Smart Cities mission, Hriday, and other government initiatives that will affect heritage in cities?
Kamalika, would you like to?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very complicated and complex and vast question, but it's an important one because in the last few years, we are seeing that there are central government schemes which allow for several cities to bring heritage into the ambit of and try to integrate it with larger developments like in infrastructure or technology, etc. And in some places, it's doing good things. Like that's how also with the JNRUM, the metro went to the old city of Delhi, and it's really made the old city a lot more accessible. Or the metro is going into places like the inner city of Jaipur. But there are other complex questions with these schemes, and sometimes they end up creating doing very cosmetic and superficial level additions without really looking at it, because a lot of these schemes are about direct tangible impact and visible actions on the ground. And in conservation, visible action takes time. You can't do it in a 1 year or 2 year kind of a framework. So the engagement with communities, the engagement with stakeholders sometimes doesn't end up happening, and it becomes a very top-down approach of consultants doing these very specific projects, and that becomes a showcase to implement heritage-based actions in cities through these central schemes. But I think fundamentally conservation in the spirit is local. It's a very local process. It's locally driven, and that is where it has the most holistic impact.
Parvati R has a question specifically for Kamalika. So she says that taking from Kamalika's comment on how the fort has faced a certain decline in imageability, how do we reconfigure the idea of the city center in a very lived sense and heritage conservation when the city, specifically the imperial city of Mumbai, is no longer the center of the lived city? Isn't it alienating to conserve the town, or so to speak?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. And if we look historically, if we look at the history of different historic cities, and at some point in the history, somehow they have all kind of reached a tipping point where downtowns have emptied out in even places like Manhattan, or the preference for suburban living has really emptied out citizens, emptied out businesses, or just the property prices have driven people away. And I think Mumbai today is again at that tipping point where many cities have been in the past, maybe 30 years back, 40 years back. But all of these cities have been able to, through active administrative interventions, been able to bring people back to the city center, bring people back to their downtown through for example in the US, and there are books such as Jane Jacobs' The Life and Death of Great American Cities, and even programs like the Main Street programs and other sort of incentivized programs that really incentivize businesses, and not only the large businesses and stores, but even the smaller, across scales and across grades, for people to come back and and also live in these downtown core areas. So if we have property prices which are just untouchable, there is bound to be gentrification. But gentrification also gives you a certain scope, and we've seen this in other cities who have converted small apartments into lofts, into affordable housing. So there are many ways to bring people back to the city center.
I think if I may introduce one concept here, one of the ways in which you can revitalize downtowns and bring people back to the city centers is by a very comprehensive program of pedestrianization. I think that is the one thing which our city lacks almost in its entirety. And we've never had the courage, and I don't think there's any other word for it, to really, look at certain areas of our city as simply places to walk rather than to drive into. And if we can bring in pedestrianization strategically in the southern tip of our city, I think we can look at quite a transformative process.
If I may add here, Mustansir,
Yes.
you spoke about Juma Masjid.
Yeah.
And it was during the second phase of our restoration that there was a bomb blast in the bazaar. And because of that bomb blast and for security reasons, vehicles are now banned from entering into that area during the main part of the day. So all the service sector comes in only in the early morning hours or in the evenings after everything has been closed down. And that made such a huge difference. So pedestrianization and the quality of life of these areas, they can be done very properly designed, of course.
But you're saying this in a positive way? You're saying this
in a positive way? Yes, in a positive way. Because Flora Fountain, some years back, I think Vikas would remember that he had also thought of this proposal. And I think even when he did his Flora Fountain, it must have been in his mind, I'm sure. But it is so important to bring in these little aspects where it's also car parking, in the sense that car parking can be then kept at the edges, and anyway redevelopment is happening. So in the context of redevelopment, why can't we have some buildings which are car parks, just like Chicago has. Chicago has almost every third building, fourth building, which is a car park. And it is not executed architecturally in any obtrusive manner. So it speaks the language of the character of the area. And so there are positive notes to pedestrianization and its implementation.
This is a question from Jeru Barucha to the entire panel. You have touched the sensitivity of conservation from imperial architecture to chawls, which is my concern as well. But the pace at which trees are cut, one wonders if the city will survive, let alone the buildings.
It's another aspect of conservation, isn't it? The conservation of nature and the environment, which is, of course, a much larger topic to the question that is being asked over here. I think here the question is a little more focused only on the aspect of trees within the city. So anyone would like to?
Yeah, so ma'am, Barucha, I mentioned the Indian Diary by Shyam Chainani right at the onset. And in the diary, he mentions, and he has also been able to enact these possibilities in other parts of the country, like, for instance, in Matheran and in Mahabaleshwar, where trees and the natural environment which encompasses settings is also taken care of. Besides that, the urban management initiatives and schemes that I was talking about, which are already in place with the MMRHCS and maybe lying at the doorsteps of the Urban Development Department, they do talk about this landscape environment. We call it as landscape environment of the precinct. And so it definitely is an integral part of the precincts. And therefore it becomes part and parcel of that legislation, if you may call it, for protection of the precinct.
Thank you. I think we are out of time. Perhaps this is a good place to stop the discussion. Madhu, would you agree to that?
I guess, yes, definitely it is 3:34. There are two more questions. What should I do? Should I pose those questions?
Well, I would defer to you if we have the time, of course.
Maybe if we could quickly discuss these because
Okay.
the participants seem to be keen. So
Sure.
there's a question to Architect Dilavri. What is your opinion on a change of function that can potentially add a new life to the existing heritage edifice as well as its setting? Can this uplift the face of the entire precinct in the near future with another tag along with it being the art district? This question is with your reference to the older patrons moving to the BKC area.
It's too long a question. Just repeat the first part of it. What is your
opinion on a change of function that can potentially add a new life to the existing heritage edifice as well as its setting?
Yeah, see, the first thing which conservation says is use of like-to-like and if it is like what I mentioned about banks these buildings were designed for the banks to be there. Now, if they move out, so there has to be something or the other which is which is the need of the hour. Now, what you get is the one which does minimum alteration to the building interiors. Second, it complements the area and enhances the area in terms of whether it's economically or other ways. But suppose if it creates more traffic jams and things like that, then it's sometimes it's more complicated. It's rather than doing good, it's doing more harm. What you recently see is that the full buildings which are there on DN Road now have 500 square feet of eating joints which have started coming up, which is very good if it is for people who can walk and if it is pedestrianized. But if everyone comes with cars and you have a major problem of parking, then that's a concern.
And the second part of this question was, can this uplift the face of the entire precinct in the near future with another tag along with it being the art district?
Well, getting tags is different because all cities have behaved and worked in a particular manner, and the inhabitants, everything works in a very complex setting. Like if you have the High Court, you have the judges which are around, you have stock exchange, you have something else. So it all works in a very you can't just have some one small areas. It can, but not for larger areas because it is a fairly dense matrix, and that's something which is to be if it is there, it is good.
And this is the last question by Parvati R. Musansir, this is regarding your response. Pedestrianization seems too ideal a response. I can personally see it happening in Bombay, but to throw it open to the other colonial cities in India, is accessing heritage via pedestrianization a solution in a socio-political context?
Let's just ask a simple question that if any city is more than 150 years old, it wasn't designed for vehicles at all. Okay, because the history of the motor car is itself almost a 20th century phenomenon. And most of our cities, I mean, unless you talk about a city like Chandigarh or Bhubaneswar or Navi Mumbai or something like that, come from an age prior to cars. And in fact, we can see in almost every city the depredation that reimagining the city as a vehicular city has caused to the older fabrics. So it's not a very difficult thing to look back at its own kind of history. Please remember that in cases before the age of cars, the one intangible that makes the city is the networking between the people in the public realm, and most of that happened at the level of the pedestrian. And those are the bonds which have broken in many ways because of the coming in of vehicles. And the best example I can give you is what has happened to a place like Muhammad Ali Road when the flyover kind of sliced through it and destroyed a very beating kind of heart of that part of the city. So I don't think that is that would be true for other colonial cities. If anything, it would be easier to implement pedestrianization now.
If pedestrianization happens, and if what Mustansir has said, half the conservation battle is won, because half your redevelopment happens for car park and other things. Everyone wants a better view of the city till you have a next high rise coming in front of you. The roads are not wide at all. So how, in that 20 feet roads, how are you going to park in stack parkings and other things when the office hours get over? Best is to stand in Fort area when any school gets over, you people, they change the route because the school buses are parked there.
QED, isn't it?
So that's it as regards questions.
Right. So thank you, Madhu, for conducting this question and answer session. And we have to end here. So I must thank our panelists, Kamalika, Kirti, and Vikas, for this very, very wonderful and intense and absorbing kind of conversation. And thank you, the Asiatic, Shehnaz, Ramesh, Madhu, and all the other organizers who have conducted this or who have set up this wonderful Jashan for our city. And I hope that all the participants, the audience who were part of this have enjoyed listening to the panelists and have got a lot to take away from it. So thank you once again.
I now invite Pooja to give a formal vote of thanks, and after that we break for tea and we regather at 4 o'clock. Pooja?
Okay. Yeah. Good evening, everyone. So as we have reached the end of this wonderful and insightful panel discussion, I would like to extend my heartiest thanks to the panelists, architect Kamalika Bose, Kirtida Unwala, architect Mustansir Dalvi, and architect Vikas Dilavri. Thank you all for the enlightening session and enhancing our insights, not just about the subject, but also beyond. And it was indeed a treat. Our heartiest thanks to the sponsors and donors, Voltas, Tata, SBI, Trent, and Yogi Books. Also thankful to all the participants for engaging in and attending this session. Thankful to the entire team of Jashn Dastane Mumbai for brilliantly hosting and handling all the session so far. So thank you, everyone. We now head to the tea break.